Hello and welcome there. I'm John Porter and I'm an extension educator in Nebraska with the Nebraska Extension and the Nebraska College of Technical Agriculture. This video today is for my class back in West Virginia of Master Gardeners who I left when I took this job. This is to finish out their class, but if you're not in that class and you stumbled upon it, feel free to watch it. You might learn a little bit of something from this video, which is going to be about gardening myths. So we know those old wives' tales that have gone down from generation to generation, spread through from family member to family member and friend to friend about things that you can do in the garden. A lot of them may or may not be true. These days, some of them have taken on a whole lot more meaning and spread much farther now that we have some new tools in order to spread them. And the most common way that they're spread these days is through social media. So we're going to talk about gardening myths in the age of social media. So we'll get started here, talk about some myths. At the end of the presentation, I'll give some ways that you can connect. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me and ask those questions that you may have. So first I'm going to start off by a few ways that you can avoid the garden myths that you find online or through other sources. So rely on trusted sources. And there are a few ways you can do that. So number one, make sure that it's a valid, say, garden magazine, journal, someone that is using science-based information. And that's one thing that we really stress here in Extension in the university system, is the information that we give out is research-based, science-based, and we think that that's very important. And we think that's very important this day and age. A lot of people don't have a really clear understanding of science, and people have even started to distrust science, and that's something that we really work on, is trying to get people to understand the importance of that. So you want to look for those trusted sources through universities, extension services, through reputable garden sources. There are some places that are notorious for giving sort of bad information or stuff that can't really be verified. One of the places that sometimes does that are the almanac type places, like the Farmer's Almanac and things like that. I know lots of people have relied on them for generations, but not everything in there is science-based. And we have a lot of this happening online now these days, where we have sort of fake news sites. We want to try to avoid those, and they're in the gardening world as well. There's lots of misinformation out there, whether it's on purpose or by accident. Luckily, some of that is being cleaned up by some of the sites like Google and Facebook that are starting to ban some of those places that give out false information on purpose. One was recently banned, was a website called Natural News, really spreading a lot of misinformation. And they were actually, if you search for something on Google now, that's not going to come up as a source unless you directly type their name in. When you're looking at information, you want to look for citations and for sources. If you see articles, you want to see where they might refer back to respected, say, gardening book or gardening journal, or to a university, to an expert. You want to look at what the source is. And you want to be critical. You want to think about stuff and think about, does it really make sense? There's lots of things out there that if you just take a minute and think about them, they don't really make a lot of sense on their own. So keeping these things in mind, I'm going to go through a few of those things that you might see either online or from other sources, and talk about are they true or are they not, and I'll let you in on a little secret. Just about everything in this presentation is not going to be true. So we're going to start with some problematic pest control. So we see a lot of this kind of stuff pop up online about homemade weed killer. It's supposed to be much safer than what you would buy at the store. We see all of these. It's not just weed killer, it's bug killer and this and that. And people say, well, this is much safer than using a pesticide. So whether or not you want to use a pesticide is one thing, but these homemade things can actually be more dangerous to both plants and or to humans than what you would actually buy for that use as a pesticide. If you need to use a pesticide, there are organic options that may be a bit safer. So you want to look at that, look at these sources. So some of these ingredients have salt in them. Salt you don't want to use because it actually can build up in the soil, and you'll never be able to plant anything there again. Whether it's table salt or Epsom salt, dish soap, a lot of these ingredients have dish soap in it, and a lot of people, it would work to kill weeds, but if you're mixing it in, say, something that you're supposed to spray on the plant for bugs, guess what? That dish soap can take the cuticle or the wax off of the leaves and kill the plant that you're spraying it on. So these can be just as dangerous as anything that you would purchase for use. And it's actually, if someone asked me about one of these concoctions to make at home, I wouldn't be able to tell you, both because they're not science-based, there's no research saying that they work, and also because it is illegal for me or anyone else to make recommendations for something that would be used as a pesticide that isn't a pesticide. So if you're a master gardener and someone asks you about one of these concoctions, guess what? You can't tell them that they can use it or not. So here's another. We have a lot of people say, well, we can plant marigolds to keep the bad bugs away. And it may do that a little bit, but a lot of the stuff, the compounds that do that are inside the marigold plant. They aren't outside the marigold plant. So one thing that a lot of people think that they will control is called a root knot nematode. You can see that picture in the right corner there. That's what a root knot nematode does. It's a microscopic worm-like creature. And what happens is people say you plant the marigolds and it keeps the nematodes away. And that's not really true. The marigold does have a compound that will keep the nematodes away, but in order for it to control the nematode, you would actually have to cut down the marigolds and fill them into the soil and wait for them to kill the nematodes before you plant in them. This one I was not aware of. I think it's a weird one, is to put cucumber peelings to get rid of ants. You put them around. I would think that would just feed the ants. I don't know of anything in a cucumber that would kill an ant, but I've seen that one circulating around. One of my favorites, of course, is how to eliminate fire ants Southern style, or ants in general, and that is to feed them grits. And I think that's quite funny. The premise is that you feed grits to the ants, and they eat them, and the grits will swell inside the ants because they take on a lot of moisture and will increase in volume very quickly. And it's just not true. It doesn't happen. So you're basically just feeding the ants. I would much rather cook the grits myself and have them to eat rather than to feed them to the ants. There's a lot of people saying to put baking soda on everything. There's all these, you see them on places like Pinterest and Facebook, these sort of clickbait sites like 7 natural uses for baking soda, or 10 ways to do this. And yes, there are a few uses. If you spray baking soda water on plants, it can help a little bit with disease control, but there's not a lot you couldn't add up to the soil, say, and change pH or anything like that. So you just want to look for something that would be effective, not wasting time or money, or even causing even more damage. So there is a pesticide spray made out of neem oil. It's a plant oil used to kill insects. But if you read any of the labels, it basically is sold as, by some companies, as a miracle cure. It will kill bugs and fungus and bacteria and everything like that. There is some insect control, but I don't know that it's quite as widespread as all the labels make it out to be. Basically, the way they come up with those labels to decide what something will do is they apply it to a wide variety of things. And if you have 100 bugs and it kills 10 of them, well, then it could be added to the label at some point. So it might not be the most effective treatment. So I sort of label neem oil sometimes as one of it's actually an old movie now, but the big fat Greek wedding movie where the father put Windex on everything as a cure. Neem oil is sort of like that. Some people will put it on everything, and it can be used for specific things, but not for everything. There's sort of another myth out there that if it's organic, it has to be good, or organic is always best, or there's a really big misconception that if you buy something organic, it means that it hasn't been treated with a pesticide. And that's simply not true. If you go to the garden center, or if you go to the produce aisle and buy something organic, there's a whole list of things that are approved for use organically that are pesticides, and some of these pesticides can be just as dangerous, if not more dangerous, than the conventional pesticide that would be used in its place. So just because it says it's organic doesn't mean it's been treated or been treated with anything that is safer than the conventional. Not saying that organic is bad, it's just knowing what the definition is. There's a weed killer cure that goes around. It's corn gluten meal. It's a byproduct of corn. And there was one university study decades ago that applied it to some to a lawn area, and it kept some weed seeds from sprouting. And ever since then, it's sort of been touted as this miracle pre-emergent herbicide weed cure. But no other researcher has ever been able to reproduce those results. So basically, it worked for one thing, and it's never been reproduced again. And that's something that we have to think about whenever we think about our information and our sources, is if we are faced with something, let's say, I would say that some treatment wouldn't work, and someone would say, well, it worked in my yard, so it has to work. That's not necessarily the case. That's an anecdotal evidence. It's not a science-based evidence, or it's not evidence that it will work in all situations. So we have to keep that in mind. Just because it works for you, or works for your neighbor, or your uncle's cousin's best friend's brother, doesn't mean that it's going to work or be effective. So another one, a lot of people will use milk to keep pests away. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but once again, that would be recommending using something that's a pesticide that isn't. So you have to be careful about that. So we have silly soil amendments and phony fertilizer, so we keep going on different things and things that don't really work. And one of those, and people swear by this, and there's companies that are founded on this, Compost Tea. So this is the practice of taking some compost, mixing it with water, letting it set, and it's supposed to have all kinds of miracle things happening with it. It's supposed to be a fertilizer. It's also supposed to work as sort of a pesticide in the same vein that yogurt would work. So compost has all kinds of bacteria in it, and people that make compost tea say you spray it on the plant, and that bacteria will keep the bad bacteria away, which in theory sounds like it would work, but it's never been reproduced or proven by research. No one has ever been able to actually measure that it has any effect, probably because after you would spray it on the plant, there would be the issue that once it dries out, the bacteria is going to die because it needs water. So it really, I don't think, would be all that effective. There's also food safety concerns, whether if there's a pathogen in the compost, then you could spread that to the plant. There's also plant disease concerns. What if we had a tomato disease in that compost, and we made the compost tea and sprayed it on all of our tomatoes? We just infected all of our tomatoes. So I think the risks are much bigger than any possible benefits that it would have. The big one that has been around for decades and decades and we can't seem to kill is about putting rocks or other things in the bottom of garden planter pots. So people will say, well, this is needed for drainage. We need to keep rocks in the bottom of the pots to let water drain out, and that's simply not true. The water will drain out whether you have rocks or not, and actually the rocks impede drainage. It creates what's called a perched water table. So if you have a transition between the fine soil and the rock or whatever you're putting in there, then what happens is at that transition, the water sort of slows down. If you think about if you had a sponge in the kitchen, you did dishes, and the sponge was wet. When you hold the sponge upright, all the water drains down to the bottom, and most of it drains out of the sponge. But what can't, once you get to a point, the water stops draining out of the sponge, but it pools on the bottom of the sponge. It sort of, all the water sort of goes to the bottom instead of the top. That's what happens with the soil. So if you're raising that soil level up in the pot, you're putting an area of heavier moisture, heavier wetness up higher in the pot into the root zone of the plant. So you can actually make the roots rot very easily by raising that up too high. So you don't need any drainage in the pot. Maybe if it was a gigantic pot and you didn't want to fill it all the way with the soil, that's okay. But any normal sized pot, do not add anything to it. That's a big, big garden myth. We have Epsom salt is treated on everything. You spray it on everything. You put it on everything. It's a miracle elixir for plants. It does have nutrients that plants use. It's magnesium and it's sulfur. So if your plant is deficient in magnesium or sulfur, it will help. But most plants aren't deficient in magnesium and sulfur, and so it won't really have any effect. You're adding a salt to the soil, so you could make it too saline and damage roots, and it could just be running off. So you want to avoid that. It's not really needed. Also, you'll see fertilizers say to spray it on the leaves. Leaves don't really take up nutrients. That's not really effective. So don't fall for that. You just apply it as the soil, the roots. That's what takes up the nutrients. I would say probably the only way the foliar fertilizing works is when it rains, it washes the fertilizer into the soil. The roots, the leaves don't really aren't really made for taking up the nutrients. Some people will use lots of actually heavy-duty fertilizers, and even though they're organic, so bone meal is used to add phosphorus and potassium, and that's fine if you need it. Just don't go applying stuff without testing soil, without knowing what you need. A lot of people will just say, well, it's good for the plant, I don't need to test. And if you have those deficiencies, sure, use the bone meal, use the blood meal, use the natural fertilizer. But just because it's an organic version doesn't mean that it can't over-fertilize, it can't have too many nutrients, it can't damage the plant. So you want to make sure that you're testing properly. There's also some miracle fertilizers out there. So this is a kelp liquid foliar fertilizer. It's supposed to have all the nutrients known to man in it, every element. And there's that list of the elements the plants need to live, and that's all they really need. So all of this stuff is not needed. And this is supposed to be some sort of miracle frost protecting biobalancing. I don't even know what that means. So be sure to think about those, what it actually means, because some of this stuff can just be made up. So is there such a thing as too much of a good thing? So some people will say there's no such thing as too much compost, and that's not true. You actually need to have just as much soil, if not more soil, than compost in raised beds in your garden, because compost doesn't have all the nutrients. You still need mineral nutrients from the soil. For root crops, too much compost can cause diseases, causes scabbing on things like potatoes and carrots. So you want to maintain, you know, a few percentage points of organic matter. So it'll take a lot to add to get there if you want 3, 4, 5% organic matter. But having too much compost is a bad thing. So be sure to have some soil in there too. So there's lots of things that propose, all these different uses for coffee grounds and things. And coffee grounds can be added to compost. You can mix them right in the soil, but they don't have magic properties that they'll, convey on the plants or anything like that. They won't really change pH, even though they're slightly acidic. When we see things like that are only slightly acidic themselves, we have to think about the pH in a natural system is going to try to balance itself. It's going to buffer itself. So yes, coffee grounds might be slightly acidic, but once you add them to the soil, it's going to be diluted and it's going to neutralize itself anyway. Sorry about that. So this is adding fertilizer right to the planting hole. You don't want to do that. That is not good. You want to fertilize around plants. You don't want to add anything to the planting hole. And when you plant, you don't want to add soil back in. You don't want to put fancy soil in when you're planting trees or shrubs. You want to keep the native soil there. If you make the soil too fancy for them, they won't want to grow out of the hole. Whenever we're looking at soils, we want to make sure that, even if it's native soil, you can amend this a little bit, but you don't want to really break it up too much. Conglomerates, those things are really good in the soil. So a lot of people, if they see this in their garden, they're going to try to till the heck out of it with a tiller and make it into a fine powder. And you actually don't want to do that. The less you till, the better. And actually, no-till systems are developing, and those are even better. So what do you think about nails in the garden? So some people will say, well, this is going to add iron to the soil. So they will bury nails with plants. They'll plant them in the planting hole, which I think is a very odd practice. Yes, there are plants that require higher levels of iron, and those are actually the plants that require a lower pH. So if you're growing blueberries or rhododendrons or something like that, you don't add nails to give them the iron. You add something like sulfur or some other acidifying agent that acidifies the soil, which releases more of the natural iron in the soil. So it's very easy to do, and you don't have to add the nails that you could possibly create some damage with later. So some terrible garden tasks, things that we do that either we shouldn't do or we do them wrong. So if you're pruning or cutting on a tree or shrub, you don't want to seal that wound up. So that can create a moist environment for diseases to germinate. You just want to let it heal on its own. You want to properly prune it, so you don't want to leave too much of a stub whenever you prune, but you don't want to paint that stuff on. It's just, or use a wax or anything like that. That just creates an environment where it makes it easier for diseases to develop. So this is a practice some people might have tried called double digging, where you dig down a few inches and you move that soil, and then you keep on digging and you mix it all up. And people swear that this is the way that you establish a new garden bed, that this is the best way to get soil aeration. And guess what? There's actually been some research done on it, and what was found, that it has no benefit whatsoever. This practice doesn't help establish a bed. It does nothing to get a bed started. It has no benefit whatsoever. So basically, people are just doing this, and you can say that you're a really heavy-duty, hard gardener, that you did a lot of work to establish your garden, but it's not really going to help you in the long run. And then a few years ago, there was this article going around saying not to rake the leaves in your lawn, just let them fall, and they are great for the lawn, and they will provide wildlife habitat. And there's a lot of issues with this. First off, if you have too many leaves on the lawn, it's going to kill off the grass, and you're going to end up with dead space. So you want to get those leaves off. Now, I'm not one that really loves to rake leaves. So I'm the person that waits until every leaf has fallen until I start raking. So that's fine, but you don't want to leave them on there for a long time. So you want to rake them up. The other issue with the leaves, yes, it does provide wildlife cover for lots of different things, especially things that you may not want, small rodents or even ticks. I did a little research on this and looking at leaf litter, and that's the best place for ticks to live. And so you might want to consider that a possibility as well. And then we just have some silly science, things that make absolutely no sense that people sort of share all the time. My favorite one that's so horrible is about the gender of peppers. So you see this online all the time about the difference between a male and female bell pepper, and guess what? It's all false. So I don't know who started this, but it just sort of seems to have a life of its own. So these are just different varieties of peppers. There's really no such thing as a male or female bell pepper type. If you think about it, so the actual flesh of the pepper, the fruit is female because it comes from the female organs of the plant. But the seeds on the inside are neither, because they have both male and female genes in there. So there's really nothing that says it's a male pepper or a female pepper. So it's kind of silly, and I don't know why anyone would want to make that up, but they did. Another one is water droplets on plants will cause burns on these. They act like mini magnifying glasses. You know, if you've ever seen kids or did it yourself where you had a magnifying glass and you tried to burn paper or burn an insect or something. That's simply not true, because guess what? It's rained for millions of years and it's not burned all the leaves off a plant. So you want to watch out for that kind of junk science. Simply not true, so you don't have to worry about anything like that. Now this is a big one that I get all the time, is about genetically modified organisms, GMOs, and about seeds and about their safety. So I'll start off, you know, if we're looking at it critically and scientifically, science has shown that there are no safety risks whenever we come to this technology. There are some controversies around it, and so some people want to avoid them in their daily life, and that's a personal decision that people make. But one place where I really take issue is a lot of people spreading confusion about garden seeds. I've had people ask or tell me that they wouldn't buy seeds at, say, just a garden store, a box store, or from certain catalog companies because they sold GMO seeds. So the first thing to know is that GMOs are not available to home gardeners. You can't go to the neighborhood box store or to the garden center and buy them for a home garden. Now, if you went to a farm store, you could buy them as a farmer, but you're going to have to sign a contract. So you know that they're not available at the garden rack because you're not going to have to sign a contract to get them. So it doesn't matter if you buy them at the big box store or from a catalog. You cannot get GMO seeds for home gardens. There's only very select plants that are actually GMO, and most of them are commodity crops like corn and soybeans and cotton. So you're not going to get them from a home garden. I have people that tell me that they won't use hybrids because they're GMOs, and that's simply not true either. That's totally different. That's just a classical breeding. It's not using genetic engineering at all. If we use that logic, then everything we eat is a GMO because nothing is in its original form. So we have to figure out what that definition is there. So once again, you can't buy them at the grocery store, at the big box store. You just simply can't find them. So it's an issue that people have created to create confusion. And I think some of that comes from some of the garden companies themselves. They'll label themselves as non-GMO, or a lot of their websites will make it a big deal about GMOs. And it's really just a marketing gimmick. So they don't, I mean, yes, they're GMO free, but they're not available. So if someone says that they only buy some certain type of tomato seeds from some certain catalog because they know that they're GMO free, well, there are no GMO tomatoes. and none especially available to home gardeners. So be sure to avoid some misinformation on that. But people say that they won't use oak leaves or are afraid to use oak leaves in compost or as mulch because oak leaves are will change the pH. Guess what? That's not true either. So if we think back to the coffee grounds, it's simply not enough to change anything. So we have the concept of companion planting. We have these books that say, you know, this plant loves that plant, or, you know, these plants are friends and these plants are enemies. And that takes it just a bit too far. Yes, there are plants that can have mutual benefits, especially with spacing. We call it usually interplanting. It's a better term to use. You know, I can plant my tomatoes and I can plant lettuce or radishes around it, and they coexist very well because they don't use the same space. Whereas we would say maybe if I planted, you know, a squash and a tomato, the squash and tomato are going to compete for the same space. But the term companion planting sort of takes it a bit too far. And some of these, you know, will say that certain plants give off things that are good for other plants, and that a lot of that's not proven either. There are some people that say that only native plants are good for pollinators, and if you plant something like a marigold or a petunia that isn't native, that it's going to be bad for the pollinators, it's going to starve them out. There's an author that sells lots of books to lots of gardeners, and he makes this claim all the time, and that's simply not true. Most of the research has shown that if you have a variety of native and non-native plants, that actually helps pollinators better if they have a wide variety of different plants to eat. It doesn't just have to be native. So there's a practice called biodynamic growing, and it's kind of a wacky thing. So a lot of it has to do with moon cycles and things like that. And it was actually developed by a person. It was sort of this personal philosophy. And so you see this popping up sometimes on like farms saying that they're a biodynamic farm, and a lot of it really kind of nonsensical. Like one of the early treatments of the biodynamics movement was that, yes, you fertilized the soil with cow manure, but that had the most mystical effect. You took the cow manure and you stuffed it in the horn of the cow, and you planted that under the plant. So kind of silly kind of stuff like that. And then I know we have lots of people that love to garden by the moon, and my parents are no exception. My father gardens this way, where he will consult the almanac and look at the moon phase. Some people take it even further, the biodynamic kind of thing, where you only deal with the top parts of plants when the moon is rising, and you only deal with the roots whenever the moon is setting, because apparently it affects the water in the plants, and that's not been ever proven or shown to have any truth to it. So, you know, take a lot of these things with a grain of salt. And as we finish up, I'll just remind you, back when we started, you know, rely on trusted sources, look for those sources, look for citations, and be critical. Think about it, have some critical thinking, and avoid some fake news. So be sure to find sources that are trustworthy there. So some good sources that we might want to look at. If you're looking for good information, the Extension Master Gardener Program, the national program, is a great source of information. So you can find them on Facebook. Just look up for the Extension Master Gardener. You'll see the green and brown logo there. That's on Twitter at EXEMG, or on Pinterest, Extension Master Gardener. So there's lots of great ideas there, and ones that have gone through scientific scrutiny. Also, extension, there's a national extension initiative that connects all of the extension services across the country. It's extension.org. You can find that. If you go on there, you can type in questions and get answers. You can find different learning modules and different information on there, so you might want to take a look at that. Extension.org, or at Extension Initiative on Facebook, or Extension for You on Twitter. The Garden Professors is also an online community of people that really strive to return scientific literacy to the garden, and it's a great place to ask questions. So there's a page, not very active at the moment, well, I'm on it, and it's, some of us have not been very active lately, so you can find that, but where the most action is on the Garden Professors blog, and it's a Facebook group. So if you have questions, you can ask them in there, and people will find the scientific information to inform you of that. And then if you want to catch up with me, get some information, follow along, ask questions, there's several ways you can find me. You can find me on Facebook at Urban Garden Guru, also on Twitter at Urban Garden Guru, online, my website, urbangarden.guru. You can also email or call me, john.porter@unl.edu, or give me a call, 402-444-7833. So you can find all of that information, and I hope you've learned something. Hope you have a critical eye for things in the future. Know where to look for the garden myths and how to avoid them. So I hope you have a wonderful gardening season and use some of this information for your benefit and learn how to avoid those common garden myths.